And there we are, the disembodied
magic.
voice.
Thank you, Jean.
Big brother or conceivably big sister is now watching us. So we will,
Rob, one quick,
Mary?
since Patrick is not here, would anyone
Quite.
like to record the minutes?
I'm sure that nobody would like to.
Yeah,
but,
I drew short straw, Mary, again. So
I knew he
I got
guilted.
it.
I knew he
They'll be
guilted somebody into
concise
it.
and very, very brief as usual.
We appreciate that. Very
That's
well.
the
Thank you,
best
Mary. I knew he had mentioned it. I'd forgotten that he had secured somebody. So we have the superintendent, the business manager, and the chair of the school committee. Where I'll leave it to the three of you to make the presentation, whatever order you think is appropriate. The floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Hillman. And if you could please give host power to co-host power to Susan Owen, that would be wonderful. So she can.
She has it.
You got it. Okay, great. Super. So first of all, I just want to introduce, we have with us, as you mentioned, Craig McClellan, who's our chair of our school committee, and Susan Owen, who is our director of finance and operations. And I believe I've met all of you, but I'm just in case, I'm Pat Sullivan, superintendent at Cohasset. And I also want to start off by thanking advisory for their advice and their work with us on this budget. It was very helpful. And then, of course, Dawn and Chris and the town for their flexibility and, as always, understanding, working with us to try to help us with our needs. So I'm going to let Sue take it and sort of drive through the presentation, moving a bit kind of rapidly, because we know you've seen this before the meeting, but we'll be glad to stop at any spot you want us to. Just raise your hand, and Sue, I'll join in to help you. And of course, I'll take the concluding portion of it. I don't know, Craig, if you wanted to say anything before we begin.
No, thank you.
Very good. Okay, so Sue, if you want to take it away, and thank you all for allowing us this opportunity. Sue?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. Glad we're all here. Let's see. So we're here to present and discuss the FY23 budget proposal from the school department. Again, like Pat said, thank you for everyone that helped us. I mean, we had multiple meetings with school committee, advisory, Dawn, Chris Senior, some of the select board. It was definitely a work in progress, and we got it balanced and voted. So I'm happy we're at this place. So we'll just move on. These are the budget priorities. They align with our strategic plan. Is the teaching and learning, the social emotional wellness, the resources, and the communication engagement. And you'll see a lot of these themes throughout all the slides from all the schools, because we're all following the same strategic plan. So requested school budget for FY 2022, our current year, the appropriated budget was $21,684,432 is where we are right now. We had our contractual salary obligations or our rollover costs at $780. We got a slight increase in circuit breaker, so we have an additional $53,000 for next year, but we also had an increase in our special ed tuitions in about $215,000. And then, as usual, we have projected retirement savings. We have some more senior staff at the higher steps of the scale retiring, and we can bring in some new staff, new teachers that are fresh and ready to hit the ground running at a lower rate on the scale. So our priority requests are the $763,015. And then we get into this slide is kind of what we need to open the doors. So based on enrollment at the Osgood Elementary School, we need to add a grade 2 teacher. So you'll see there's a grade 2 teacher here. At the middle school, we need to add a math specialist. We currently do not have one at the middle school. And based on student needs, MCAS scores, learning gaps, we are in desperate need of a math specialist. School committee voted a few weeks ago to increase the substitute teacher rate from $80 per day to $100 per day, which there's a slide here that shows you a comparison of what the other towns are. We were at the very low end of what we were paying substitutes, and we're having a hard time keeping or maintaining and even getting some substitutes. Our increase to supplies and materials, this one originally was about $108,000. We worked as an administrative team for the last week or so, trying to see, what things we had to have and what things we could possibly do without for another year. So we dropped that 108 to the 50,000. And then on our original proposal, we wanted to continue the process of reducing our full day kindergarten tuition, because we're one of the only districts left that charge for full day K. Right now, the current charges, it was $3,500 last year. We dropped it to $33 this year. And the proposal was to reduce it again, but you'll see further on, we made some changes. So the total additions to the budget are about $983,033. And then we got into reductions. A difficult place to be. We did not cut any staff, which was very important. We did not lay off. We looked at other areas. We worked with the town very closely. Fortunately, the town agreed that we have 3 IT specialists that work for the school department from the town. And the school department funds the majority of their salaries. So they're taking back 1 IT systems administrator will be funded on the town side versus the school side. So that was a savings of $69,000 to us. We talked at great length about sped stabilization fund and unbudgeted or unallocated tuitions, which our tuitions are up over $215,000 for next year. So we're going to utilize the $200,000 that we're allowed to do the sped stabilization account, which does require a vote from the school committee and a vote from the select board. The athletic trainer is currently here working. We're not cutting him. We're only just shifting his funding.
Susan, I believe Mr. Collins has a question.
Yeah, you said you kept all the teachers. Do I understand that you had 1 or 2 teachers who had been hired on a grant basis? And how's that working out?
We have several teachers that have been hired, or reading specialists, social workers, nurses that have been hired through the grant process.
No, are the grants still in effect, or are we off the grants?
Some of them are in effect, some of them aren't. The grants that are not in effect, we did have to absorb into the budget. 2 custodians. Sue, if I miss something, tell me. 2 custodians, a halftime nurse, and also our technology director / digital learning director. So those are the positions that we felt were vital during the pandemic, and they're still vital as we're still in the pandemic. We're obviously moving towards endemic, but we were in dire need before. So those are definitely part of this budget. And then we also have a couple of reading specialists, as Sue said, and I think that's it for the next grant, Sue.
Yes, sir.
If we had not had the grants, would we have hired these other specialists?
We would have had to have. At this point, we would have had to have, regardless of the pandemic. Yeah, we were in dire need of them.
I see a couple of more hands from the advisory committee. Mike, then Mary. Sorry, Fran, were you finished?
That's good. Yeah, that's fine.
I thought you were. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Fran got to most of my question, just to understand in terms of full-time equivalents, how many were brought on through grants. So I've got 2 custodians, 1 tech director, a half-time nurse, and then reading specialists. How many reading specialists?
Yeah.
Just trying to frame out.
Sure. No, fair.
2 halftime.
2 halftime, and those are still so remember, there were 3 ESSER grants, and the reading specialists are still under grant for another year.
Okay, so 2 reading specialists, 2 custodians, 1 tech director, and a halftime nurse. So 5.5 FTEs under grants.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mary?
So I just want to clarify for the committee. So those appear to those that have asked in that rollover number of 780. So that's.
Not,
very-
not all of them, not all of them, because.
Well, not the reading specialist, right? But,
Correct, right.
those are still covered by grants, but just where, because we've been working on this for a long time. So as we were trying to kind of parse through this, because it is a little difficult when a position is brought in by a grant and then is absorbed by the budget. But hopefully Patrick and, the school committee, I think understand that it is important for us to just see how many bodies have walked in the door.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for responding to those questions. Why don't you continue with the presentation?
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
So our total budget reductions are approximately $322,113. Summary sheet is the FY22 appropriated budget where we sit now. You have the additions of the 983. You have the reductions of the 322. So the actual request from the school department is $660,920 additional dollars to bring us to a $22,345,352 budget for the FY23 year, which is about a 3.05% increase. Originally, we had come forward with, I think it was 4.8. We had multiple meetings and discussions with town accountant and town manager and advisory that the 4 point something just wasn't feasible. So we continue to go back to the drawing board and try to see where we could shave off anything. And it was a collaborative effort, honestly. Everyone was coming up with ideas, including Dawn, Chris, advisory. So we're at a balanced state. This is what the town has said they could allocate to us. So this is the budget that we're living within right now.
Okay, Mike, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. So if I could just go back to the contractual salary line, which was a 3.6% increase. Does that include the 5.5 FTEs? Because was there something about, was there a new contract or something that brought that 3.6% above what we would think the levy would normally support?
So yes, I think that's a two-part question. So yes, those additional staff are in that rollover cost. However, it's even if we're sticking at the 2 or 2.5% levy, if that's what we're talking, just to roll over our staff, just to move them their steps in lanes, is 3.6% increase. So we're coming out of the gate with not enough money based on the 3.05. So it's a shell game. You have to shift. We had to make sacrifices. We had to look at what we had to have and what we could live without for another year. But those numbers, they are in there. So even, a 3.5 or 3.05% increase, when you start looking at those steps and scales, the percentage, there's percentages between those steps as well. So even if the COLA is a 2%, the step, the difference between step 1 and 2 could be 3.47%. It could be 2.5%. So it's, they're getting the COLA plus the step increase. And that's what drives that contractual obligation.
Okay, and this is informational. I'm just trying to understand this. So that means there must have been some increases above. So I'm guessing because the 5.5%, the 5.5 FTEs are in that number, that's what's taking it to 3.6 versus a regular step increase of like 2.5 to 3%, right? Because you're taking the average above what I would normally expect coming from normal step increases.
Well, to remember now, I mean, I know you're talking about the correct thing, but 2 of the positions is still covered under a grant, so it's not 5.5. But you are correct that they are in that number. Correct, Sue?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I think that, embedded in your question is if you controlled for the additional positions, the ones that were grants, coming off grants, et cetera, I doubt that that would account for much of the percentage difference, that the entire collective bargained, the collective bargaining units go up entirely 2% a year. And then on top of that, when there's a reference to steps and lanes, those are each individual teacher, other faculty, staff have longevity steps, and if they increase their qualifications, what they call lanes, so they're moving up and out a chart, and that can move a lot faster than 2%. So we should maybe have a sit down at some point as a committee to get a better understanding of the way in which that works. But a very large percentage of the town's budget is governed by a grid attached to a contract, and that drives, puts an inflationary, that's the wrong word, and a driver for increases in salaries that are ineluctable. So I saw Jean's hand and then Don's.
Thanks, Rob. Can we go back to the Special Education Stabilization Fund conversation?
Sure.
I believe it said that you could tap that for next year, but you really can't because it's only for use with unanticipated out of district or needs. So I was on the school committee when that happened and the Modernization Act came in. So it's for unanticipated sped costs in the current year. You can't use it for the next year. So I'm thinking that possibly you could reallocate once you obtain those funds, reallocate to the 22 budget, and then use some of those funds that you had used. And I don't know whether you would transfer them to the general fund so that you could put them back into the budget for 23. Maybe Dawn could help with that.
So we researched this pretty extensively because of the can we or can't we. So it does say for unbudgeted or unanticipated. I reached out to Department of Ed and asked this question direct and said, if our tuitions have increased by $215,000 for next year, and our town cannot meet those needs and fund us, can we utilize sped stabilization? And Jay Sullivan said, absolutely. I had him send it to me in writing just to be sure. So I wanted to be sure with them because I know that's where the sped stabilization began.
Right.
And he said, absolutely, because it's unbudgeted. The town cannot fund it.
Okay, I thought that the way the act read was, we're just parsing words here, but
Jean,
I
you're
thought
right.
it was unexpected, not unbudgeted. And there's a slight difference in that. But if you have it in writing that you can use it for next year.
I do.
Okay.
Yeah, that came up at a meeting, and I think as a result of that, and as a result of Ms. Owens double checking with DESE, we were comfortable that the manner in which those funds are being used was acceptable. DESE said so. So I'm sorry, Don, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, well, I was touching on before, just you already hit it about the 2% COLA, and basically if you're not at the last step on the chart, you're getting basically 5.4% a year anyway. But to Jean's point, I read it the same way. Most of my colleagues read it the same way, but we did get it in writing. So, that makes us a little bit more comfortable with that. And Susan and I can work this out. It may just be cleaner from a budgetary year to year to request those funds now and prepay the sped tuition for the first 3 months, so that that's going to be a much cleaner way of doing it than trying to transfer money from from that fund as of July 1. But Susan and I can work out those details. It's nice to have that in writing from DESC
Yes.
to allow us to do that.
Okay, any further questions at this checkpoint? Seeing none, if you want to continue, please do.
Okay. This is just a summary worksheet that kind of puts it all in one place. So it will show you the rollover contractual obligations, the increase in the circuit breaker, and it goes through, the staffing and other requests, and then the reductions to get us to the 3.05%, or the $660,920 increase. So it's just kind of a summary sheet in a different view. This is the slide that represents the decision that the school committee made based on increasing their substitute teachers daily rate. So if you can see here, we were at $80 per day. The only other district in the area that was less than that was Situate at 75. So we took the leap of faith and we increased it to $100 per day, just to be more competitive and pay staff more than minimum wage, basically. $80 a day is about $13.33 an hour. So it's not a
And
lot.
it's so hard to get subs now. That's another major problem, particularly with the rate as it was.
Can I just ask a quick question? Is there a projection? There's no doubt that the district has to do it. But is there a projection as to how much cost that added? Is that on one of the sheets we've seen?
Yes.
Okay.
It's on this sheet here. On the staffing, it says increase the substitute teacher rate. And it
Right,
was on
there
one
it
of the
is.
previous slides.
Maybe
on one of the
maybe I
slides.
made a misrepresentation when I said that we could all read, because evidently I cannot. So
It's, okay, so it's on this slide as well. So it's on the slide and it's on the worksheet.
wow. Okay, carry on.
And then we just have, some information from each of our principals in our district.
So I think you can go fairly rapidly through this part,
Okay.
but we can certainly stop at any point. These are just really our school's priorities individually. And that you'll see, if you've had a chance to read it, there's a definite pattern that follows our strategic plan. So everything is aligning in the same direction based on the needs of the district, which, remember, our strategic plan is very data driven. It's both qualitatively and quantitatively driven and put together to meet the needs of our district. So go ahead, Sue.
Okay, so these are the priorities that the Osgood Elementary School has put together. Again, like Pat said, they align with our strategic plan. The data supporting what she used to make the decisions. Her enrollment and class size for the current year and for next year. You can see where we added the grade 2. The grade 1 currently has 107 students in it with 6 sections. So when they move on to grade 2, we wanted to keep the same class size and the same number of students.
And I just want to make a point about that, Sue, if I can, just to underscore the need of our early readers, and the needs of our early readers, and the fact that any first grade teacher, any place, can tell you that our kindergartners who had a virtual experience in any school district are coming in with not the same set of skills. And that's trickling up. We're finding ourselves moving back to help those students. And second grade is such a pivotal year, particularly in Cohasset as we move. It's a bridge grade as we move from Osgood to Deer Hill. And we really felt that it was crucial to keep those numbers low. With enrollment moving the next year, we would have needed this position from just an enrollment perspective, as you can see. But we felt like we needed it from a learning perspective this year more than anything. So I just want to add that. Mary looks like she has her.
That's what I was going to say. Go ahead,
I'm
Mary.
sorry, I don't want to, Rob.
No.
Your meeting, I'm used to doing.
I can glaze out in the middle of things and need some help. Not at all.
I apologize.
This is a good time to please go ahead, Mary.
I just wanted to talk about that a little bit, the addition of the grade 2 teacher, because, and I know I mean, if there were 5 sections, I think you'd have 21.6 students. That is such a bizarre thing, but, and I realize that all students are not equal, and it's a very difficult job breaking up classes. But you spoke to it in a sense already, Patrick, but you absolutely feel like this is essential?
I do. I mean, look, this is as I mentioned to the advisory, and we've talked about, I really struggled this year to recommend cuts because of where we were coming through the pandemic.
Mhm.
And that includes those grant funded positions. I mean, they were needed before the pandemic. They were certainly needed during the pandemic, and to think about losing them now would be really difficult. This one, we thought of long and hard, but with the support of the school committee, really felt that keeping those numbers low, that's where we're seeing our learning gaps. We're seeing them in particularly comprehension. And you can imagine if you're not seeing, the teachers' face and mouth, and there's so much that goes into early phonics with that there are going to be gaps. And we do believe we need this.
Okay. You are the educators, so I'm not going to debate that in any way. I would just really encourage, I mean, I know you have your reading specialists on a grant program through this coming year.
Correct.
But I would just really encourage an eye towards the following year's budget to be able to make room for them, not to just increase in terms of an FTE.
Yes.
And I know there have been countless reports, especially for these elementary kids, about what's happened in the last couple of years. I mean, they started in kindergarten and now they're, it's unfortunate, to be sure. So that's my only comment. Just look ahead to that.
We agree. Those are positions we need to keep, and we need to think about that from a budget standpoint. This is an odd year for us because of, not really knowing what the pandemic was going to bring in terms of learning gaps, just sort of supposing, and now we're really seeing. And it's a different feeling when you have to make cuts around those positions.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just, just to add to that,
I saw another hand go up before you started talking, Ms. Owen.
Okay.
Jean? Jean, did you have a?
Yeah, sorry, I was just unmuting myself. Thanks, Rob. So following from Mary's comment, do you feel like the budget sufficiently builds in special education expenses, not necessarily the big placements that you know about right now that we've talked about in terms of accessing special ed trust, but as a result of the pandemic, I do think that there are a lot of gaps that could be construed as learning, but also, with early intervention, screening for dyslexia, a whole bunch of things that I know have really been the subject of a lot of discussion. And I'm pleased to see the schools really taking that, really taking a close look at that. And I appreciate the school committee has done the same. Do you feel like we've built enough into the budget, in part to move away from the tiered study or the child study programs and account for more significant referrals and assessments that might need to happen, particularly whereas we all struggle with how to address whether this is a learning gap or a learning disability, and try to figure that out, because I do sense that is evolving, particularly where Desi's surveying the schools and the parents over these last few months who have children in the special ed program. And I would imagine that there might be some fallout from that as well.
Yeah, I can answer that a little bit, and Sue join in, but yeah, I do. I believe we're certainly, those are very astute comments. We're absolutely looking at that. I would say our tiered focus monitoring, MTSS, is something that we, obviously that's designed to help all students, not just students who invariably or inevitably because of a disability become students who receive a special education program. But we're looking at all that. We are seeing needs in a therapeutic sense for students. And I can really see as we move forward, years to come, maybe not so far in the future, that establishing a strong therapeutic element within our schools will very much help reduce out-of-district costs for students who have to be outplaced because we can't provide for it. And will very much help students who have a variety of special education needs, and also students who, just need that service. But we're looking at that. We are also programmatically looking at dyslexia, the Shaywitz dyslexia screeners, and we're approaching really I would call it a comprehensive approach to reading, and doing a lot with our funding. And we did use some of our grant funding to fund some embedded literacy within our schools. And then also, looking forward with that in terms of the science of reading and blending in some phonetic awareness within our programming. So there's a lot happening, and talking with our director of student services and our assistant superintendent, we think we're accounting for it, but you're not wrong. It is certainly on our minds. That's a really astute question. So thank you for that.
I saw Patrick's hand, then Fran.
Thanks, Rob. Sorry I had to join. I had a conflict and had to join a little late. So if these were addressed before, I apologize. Two questions. One question I have is based in talking about the learning gaps that you're seeing that appear to be arising during the COVID years. What specifically are those based on? Is that test scores? Is that individual assessments? What's the sort of quantitative criteria for determining that these learning gaps exist and that they need to be addressed through staffing? Second question. Yeah, let me go ahead and address that. And I do have a second question.
Okay, that's great. The multi-part questions I do a lot of, but I love just stopping with one. So we have some benchmark assessments for our students. One is called DIBELS. Another ones we've brought in a program called iReady that are diagnostic tools to look at our students and how they're performing. We also have a variety of on-the-spot teacher or specialist assessments that we do with students to determine how they're progressing from a comprehension standpoint. And we just adopted a new program, in mathematics called Bridges Math, and there are a lot of benchmark assessments that go along with that. And our math specialists have a series of on-the-spot tests too that they provide students. The MCAS last year didn't give us as much information as it has in the past, but it did give us some trending with some of our older students, i.e. the math gaps that we're seeing in our middle school. So I hope that answers your question. It's a series of qualitative and quantitative tests, and then of course, you have teachers working with the kids every single day, and they're seeing general trends and specific learning needs. And then, as Ms. Diplo said, we do have a tiered focus monitoring system that receives referrals a lot. And when we get referrals to that, we create timed and tracked plans for those students. And part of those plans attenuate to the students with various tiers, which basically define intensity of the support. And we're finding that we have more students being referred to those that are struggling in areas that maybe they weren't struggling in before. And we're not even talking about the other gaps we see in some social emotional learning areas and just adjustment areas in general. I mean, we have some students who are in our middle school. I'll give you an example. We have 8th graders who have never had a real middle school experience. Some of these kids that's such a haven for social development, and they haven't had a dance. Just to give you an example, I mean, there's a lot that comes with that, and we're finding as a staff we're reteaching a lot of these social skills too, and that comes with some support needs. We just hired a social worker as well. We were able to do some work in that. That's not in the that was a replacement position, but we're able to I'm kind of meandering off the question, but I hope that answered it.
It's helpful. Second question, because I didn't see in my review of the materials, it would be interesting, but probably beyond the scope of today's presentation, to know the overall, like a 10-year trending of the overall district enrollment figures versus the year-over-year increase in budget, to see what tracking we have, what trends we have over a longer time period.
Yeah, we have that. We do have a 10-year, actually, the group that just did our AI3 who did for our new facilities committee did a building assessment, asked for that information, and we were able to give it to them. So we actually have that, and we see certain dips, and then it flattens out. And even just from the students we have now, you will see a bit of a dip, and then we have those larger classes coming in K and 1, and next year, well, not so much 2, but K and 1, and it appears we have a very healthy K enrollment already who are registered. So I suspect those numbers will sweep out and sort of flatline and even. But I do have that. I don't have it in front of me, but it's kind of a waving line that it dips at times and flattens back out over 10 years.
And if I can just add, I think in one of our
ahead.
meetings with Mary, I think it was Mary and Jean, they had asked for the enrollment data. So I think at one point we did send it. It's just not in the presentation today.
We do
Fran?
have it, Patrick, so we can share that with the committee later.
Thank
Okay,
Fran?
thank you.
I'll be glad to share anything.
Fran,
To
you have a
that-
question?
Back to that extra second grade teacher. We're talking about 3 pupils, barely 3 pupils per class to go from 5 to 6. And that requires obviously hiring an extra teacher. And does that also require hiring a classroom aide?
Not, and then no, we only have we've only invested in aides in our kindergarten classes. That's an investment we made. So,
But it
but
seems
no,
to me 21.2 kids, 21.4 kids. I don't know
Yep.
who's going to be the poor 4/10 of a kid, but you probably have a special seat for them.
well,
But I think
I hear.
I think that, gee, that seems like an awful big reach for pretty big. All of these increases are obviously incremental, but in the aggregate, they add up to a fair amount of money. And I'm just wondering, do we really and truly need to increase the class sizes from 5 to 6 for 3 people per class? That's not a big class, 21 people.
I hear that, and I just it's such an area of need for us right now. And as you can see, the trending, the following year with the class size being 127, we're absolutely going to need one in there. So my thought is that we won't necessarily increase the 3rd grade position next year, which will bring the 107 over to it, because the kids are a little older and they'll have benefited from that intense work. But we're going to have to add this position to foster our 127 kids anyway in the following year. But we really felt in the school committee, and this was you're hitting a point where we had a lot of discussion over. But we really felt that based on some of the data, well, I didn't really share the data as much as sharing the sources of the data, that it was really more essential than not essential to keep the numbers as low as we possibly could. And I think the 17.8 in 1st grade was a struggle because of the needs. Like I said, those kids who were coming in there just weren't even nearly as prepared as our typical kindergartners are. And we feel like that's just going to project into the next grade. And so we're really trying to keep that group who really, they really suffered from the pandemic in terms of an early literacy. And early literacy is, I would say, the most important thing that we teach in elementary school. I mean, it's just everything. So we're really hitting where the iron's hot. But Mr. Collins, I do understand your point, and we had a lot of debate around it.
Yeah, I agree with you on the literacy end of it. It's incredibly critical. Well, I just like to think that if we could defer that for another year, obviously you've given it a lot of thought now, but I think we need to be very, very careful how we make our increases, because they just have a way of, all of a sudden we got a heck of a lot of money we're having to deal with, and do we really need to do it? But thank you for your answer.
Yes, I appreciate that. And I think we just need to be mindful. I think, as Mary said, with our reading specialists next year, we have to be mindful of, we did make this jump for second grade. Do we really need to, continue that next year for third grade? Or can we just wait on that and make the savings in that year? That's sort of what we are looking at.
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Why don't we continue or complete the presentation? We can get in any more questions we have and move
Sure.
on to some votes. Go ahead.
Then we get into the Deer Hill Elementary School. The school priorities here, again, you'll see very similar themes. The enrollment at Deer Hill this year and next year. So we added a grade 5 this current year for the larger grade 4 that moved up. So you can see it went from 5 to 6. But next year, we're not projecting any changes. This is more data just to support our priorities in a pie chart. Goes again in line with our strategic plan. The budget requests that support, student learning. Again, you'll see the repeated themes, the math curriculum, the social emotional, the building facilities. High school,
Middle school.
middle school, sorry.
Okay.
Middle school is adding a math specialist, like we talked about. So, these are the reasons, these are his the priorities for the school. This is the proposed creation of the middle school math specialist.
And just to mention this one, because I'm sure there's some questions. This is, it does have some drive from our MCAS scores, which dip significantly when we hit middle school. You have to remember, we have math specialists in our elementary schools, and we have a lot of one-on-one support happening with those students. And then we go into the middle school and we don't. So this is a very data-driven position, and in coming out of the pandemic, it's even more prominent.
Fran, I see your hand up.
Yes, one more quick question. You know what that means, quick question. Are we teaching civics in the middle school? Or the high
Yes,
school?
we are. Yeah, every student's required to do a civics project in 8th grade.
8th grade. All right, thank you very much. Back in my day, we all had to take it as well. So.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that was a good, they re-added that a couple of years back, and it was a good move.
There's an enrollment slide for the middle school, current year to projected next year. And these are just more of the middle school priorities in the, proposed create and implement a coding. We didn't need to add a position for the coding. They're just kind of reorganizing the department and making room for a coding class.
This is an exciting one, because we're really building out our computer science / technology pathway in Cohasset, which we haven't had prominently. And there's some great organization happening. And this class is more in tune with coding than actually the design engineering principles of building the robot, which is also important. But this class is really more geared towards the coding. And I think the teaching of that is going to be greatly beneficial to the kids moving forward in their lives. So it's good stuff.
More data. I'm not going to read through it, just more data supporting the requests at the middle school. And then we get into the high school. No asks here, but again, his, school priorities are aligned with our strategic plan. We get into the enrollment for the current year and in the next year. The high school. In this one, Pat, I don't know if you want to take.
Yeah, I'm
this
not
one
going
away.
to go through the whole thing, but you can see these are just some of a lot of this is again aligned with our strategic plan, and just some areas moving forward that Cohasset Public Schools could grow with. And You can see some of these are positional and others are operational, such as the, long-term transportation solution parking. And they're tied into really what our needs are. So I won't read all of them, but I'd be more than happy to talk about any of them. And these will probably be the things that we'll be talking about for years to come, in some way or another.
Right. I mean, these are kind of our future needs, future thoughts.
Jean?
Has the school district done any kind of survey of families to see who might be leaving to go to private school in ninth grade?
That's a good question. I
We
don't
used to do
know.
that every year.
Yeah, we haven't, to my knowledge, done a formal survey of families, but I know that Principal Mills and team were working on trying to get that data together. So I'd be interested to see where they are. That's a really good question because my mind has been other places and I should be checking on that. So thank you, Jean.
You're welcome.
Spoken to someone who's done this a lot, so thank you.
Yeah, like for 10 years.
Yeah.
There also should be, in my time, they also opened middle school programs in, I believe, all of the private schools. So you should be looking at that also.
We have in past years. Of course, the last few years have been so strange. Our game is a little off in some of these areas, so we have to bring them. Yeah, that's a great reminder for you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
I don't think your game's been off, Dr. Sullivan. I think your game's been on.
It's been on, but on in a different way, right?
I think that you've been dealing with a lot in the last 2 years, and so maybe some more traditional inquiries haven't been made, but I don't think your game's been off at all. So I just, let's not say that because that's not accurate.
I appreciate that.
I've got hands from Jean and then Jack.
So yes, Dr. Sullivan, you're absolutely right in terms of private schools changing. As someone who has children in 2 of the schools that were just presented, I know that parents are pulling kids in and out of private school depending on their personal circumstance. And it's not following maybe the traditional trajectory because the pandemic has really changed a lot for a lot of people. And that middle schools are now starting to enroll people as well as at the higher elementary school. So there's just a huge amount of influx going on. But my question actually related to the bus issue. I know that we had a shortage of bus drivers. I've seen a lot on social media about, the school buses and why don't kids walk and blah, blah, blah. And just to level set, we all know that for those of us with children in school know that we're trying to be mindful during the pandemic of not having your children in a bus because of the spacing considerations. And then during the, we were driving kids to school or having our children walk. And then during the pandemic the staffing shortage came. And so I guess I'm curious about long-term transportation solutions. Because I know that I think parents were happy to do it and I think they continue to be happy to do it, but there's probably some parents that, are just trying to figure out, their situation. So I'm curious as to what the thinking is, including, if I recall correctly, right before the pandemic occurred too, we were turning back money from the school budget because we were saving, we weren't spending as much on the bus leases. And so we ironically had savings at that point through the leases. And so just financially, I'm wondering where we sit on all of that.
Yeah, it's a good question. Sue, you can chime in here, but I'll just mention that we did renew our lease for a year. We looked at outsourcing buses.
Yeah.
We were really looking at a lot of different options. We were looking at electric buses, all kinds of things. And what we were finding in terms of an outsourcing buses is they were not, there's a driver shortage, as you can imagine. And also you see in the news, the National Guard coming in. We couldn't even get them, by the way, but that's another story. When we looked at outsourcing potentially our buses, there weren't any companies that even, and that was just a potentiality. We love our bus drivers. We want to try to, but we were, a little bit desperate in terms of what we were going to be doing coming out of the pandemic. And we looked, and there weren't any companies that wanted to take us on. They were struggling just to take on their own crew. So that wasn't necessarily, that became very clear wasn't the best option for us. We did roll over our lease. I do have to say our buses are fairly full. Our buses are, right now we're really maximizing our buses. And as you know, we have had a shortage of drivers, and we're very tight. We now have 2 drivers though that are just about we're just waiting for the registry. They're all trained. They have their hours in. So hopefully we'll be in a good position. The long-term solutions though, we do have to figure out again, outside of the pandemic, we start moving out, is outsourcing the best option for us. And then there's the bus parking solution problem, where we were able to work to lease some property for the next year and this year from a private business owner in Cohasset. But we have, we do have some needs there, and that could come with a price tag if we're building a space, and there's not really a plentiful amount of area for that. And we haven't really been able to find a long-term home for the buses other than obviously in the summer. So we just don't have the parking capacity.
Can I, sorry, I thought you were finished.
I am, unless you have more
Okay.
questions.
Well, I see one more hand, and we're just at the end of our time. And this is pretty typical when the school discussion starts, is that we have an agenda to talk about a fairly tight budget, but the school department and what it does is so vital and so interesting that it tends to expand. So
Yeah.
Jack did have his hand up, and then I've got a
Yes.
quick thing about the budget. And then unless there's something critical, I think the advisory committee needs to move on to finish our business. So Jack.
This is our
do you have
last
something?
slide. You'll be happy to know. So sorry, Mr.
Fantastic.
Craig.
Well, after that, I'm hesitant to say anything. But anyway, all I really wanted to say is I wanted to add to what Gina Stino said about taking a look at what happens to our enrollment in the middle school to high school and what projections we have. And I think that's something that we need to keep an eye on. But beyond that, I just wanted to add that I think that is worthy of following. And Patrick, I'm sure you are already. So thank you.
Yeah, we are. I was just making the point that actually Gene made much better. Sorry, Mr. Dipolo made much better for me. Is that this is just that's what I meant by it's such a strange in and out process, with the pandemic. And some people who wouldn't typically go to private schools in the past have gone there because they thought it was a different scenario in terms of masking. And I don't know what the thinking was, but I know there was some thinking that varied depending on who the individual was. But now as we're moving towards an endemic and a little bit of a different scenario, potentially, certainly, right now we have a different scenario than we've had in the pandemic for the other years that led into it. Maybe we'll be back to a more typical pattern, but to Gene Estino's point, we do need to take a look at that.
Yeah, and I was actually I was actually concerned with not so much pandemic related stuff, but long term.
Yo, good point.
I was going to wrap up, but I did see Gina Stino's hand. So Jean, did you have something to add to that?
I did. Thank you. It's important data. And just as an example of why, I think it was my oldest daughter's year, 20 students left. So that's a huge amount of kids to lose in a school year. So it's really important to do that research and make sure we know exactly how many people we're going to have sitting in each seat. And to Patrick's point, I know I read all the stories about people pulling their kids out and putting them in private schools because they wanted their kids in school and the public schools weren't. So there was a lot that came into this over the last year and a half, but it's still important data to have.
No doubt, no doubt.
you.
Very well taken. Thank you.
So I'm going to exercise my prerogative to sort of make a couple of quick points that I've been saving through this conversation, and it does have to do with the budget process and the advisory committee. So I'm selfish about the advisory committee. I really like the advisory committee, and we've spent a lot of this year trying to position ourselves as a relevant stop in the town meeting and special town meeting process, not simply a box to be checked at the end of the process, and to make meaningful contributions to all of the warrant articles. We have after the select board, we have the broadest possible mandate. We can stick our noses where we like. It's great. But but I'm mindful that it's March 31st and we're having this conversation about the last component of the budget when in order to hit our statutory deadline, our warrant has to go to the printer within a week. That said, the opening comments reflected from both Susan and the superintendent reflected a lot of committee work that did put, the advisory committee's point of view on the table, and I think some material assistance to getting this done. My comments are, and they've been like this to the town administration and the departments, is particularly with the budget, when we sit down and spend $50-something million, that the greater the lead time, the better the work. So I'm hoping that next year we can get to this even earlier and get involved. That's point one. Point number two is in terms of presenting the school budget, and people who do more accounting than I am may have different ideas, but I think that coming to the table with last year's budget as a fait accompli, here's $21 million. Now let's talk about what gets added to that. That there are a lot of moving parts inside that budget. Some of the conversations we had and some of the savings that we found were in there, and where some things take priorities, other priorities may diminish to some extent. So when we do start talking about the budget next year, and I know you have a long roll up, I think we'd like to be involved in not just taking what this year's budget is as a given and moving forward, but really looking at where efficiencies can be had in that. Apart from that, my last point is that throughout this budget cycle, looking at 3% plus a little tiny bit increase in the amount of money available in the town budget, the size of the pie by statute, lots of constituencies have identified a real need to have a sit down among the committees and the professionals who deal with this at the highest level. That would include the schools, which represents the largest single slice of the budget, and appropriately so. Town administration, the finance director, the capital budget committee, who gets to spend 1.9 million of our dollars every year, and they do it very well. Potentially CPC and advisory, because we can. But to have a broader conversation about long-term capital planning and long-term revenue projections, because when I hear that any department, yours or any other, has an embedded price adjustment per year that is beyond the levy limit, it fills me with a nameless dread. And I think those of us who've been around long enough, and which I increasingly realize includes me, to remember economic dips in the late aughts, in the late 90s, they can cause real pain if they're not planned for. So I think this is a pretty good budget cycle. I think maybe it's a very good budget cycle. Why? Because we're going to go town meeting with a balanced budget, and we've achieved peace in our time. But I think that there should be some good work to be done in the next 6 months rather than 10 months from now. So that's my advertisement for the relevance of the advisory committee. My thanks to the committees who've joined us. And I think also, there's a lot of ideas from these committees about the schools. Everybody's interested in the schools. We have children in the schools. We all went to school. It must be great to be a school administrator because everybody's got an opinion. I have a lot of sympathy for that. But
It's not boring. It's not boring. I
yeah,
will
it
say.
never is. So if there's a reason to maybe have a summit or a roundtable of some sort to really kick around these notions of enrollment issues and transportation issues and other options, and to unlock some of the talent pool, not just on the boards, but in the town generally. I'm not talking about mass meetings, but a select group of people interested people to generate some maintaining the budget and increasing the delivery of service. I'd be all for it. So speech over. Corey, did you have anything further from the select board?
One of my members has their hand up. Member Creighton, do you want to have a comment?
Yeah, Rob, I just want to second, can people hear me? Yeah. Oh, I just want to second what you just said, and very briefly. In fact, we've had a lot of good times. Financially, something's going to happen. We don't know what it will be, but we need to start being prepared for that. So budget planning is very, very crucial. And Rob, your points were very, very well taken. And I think it's time that we should take them very seriously. Thanks.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll jump back in here. Oh, sorry, Rob, do you want to?
I don't want to be the guy who's sitting there saying winter is coming, but it's. I think we should all have our finger in the air at some point. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, Member Healy, go ahead.
Yeah, to follow on Jack's comments, Rob, I've talked with Chris Senior about, and capital budget has talked about it too. And I'm sure they've talked with you about starting real capital planning in probably early May, including not just from a budgetary standpoint, but obviously we have a lot of large capital needs, including the school facilities committee that's out there. And Hingham has already begun this process themselves through a sustainable budget committee that hopefully might be a model for some of the work that we want to do. So I'm happy to send that presentation to anyone who's interested, because Hingham literally is doing the same thing as I speak right now. And I think it's a good example of where Cohasset might be headed, as well as we grapple with similar issues, both on the capital and budget side.
If only the advisory committee had friends with deep connections in Hingham. I don't know.
It's all public. It's online.
I understand. All right. Unless there's anything further, Corey, go ahead.
I think we're good. I just want to speak. I think I speak for all my members on the select board. Thank you all for the time and effort you all put in on advisory on a school committee. We all know these decisions are hard fought and hard decided, and this town is obviously grateful to all of you. So with that out of the way, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
The select board. Yes.
I move to adjourn.
Okay. Do I have a second?
This meeting.
Second.
All right. Roll call. Mr. Creighton.
Jack Creighton, aye.
Member Healy.
Jean Healy Dippledy.
Corey Evans, aye. That is a wrap for the select board. Thank you for your time tonight, everybody.
Very well, and thanks to
Thank
the
you.
superintendent, the business manager, and the chair of the school committee. We appreciate your attendance.
Thank you
and
all.
input. Thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you for everything. Much appreciated.
Thanks all. Have a nice night.